Okay, let's unpack this. Even these incredible spiritual giants, figures we often picture in like total serene isolation, they often have their own guides, their gurus.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't always a simple one-way flow of wisdom.
Not at all.
Imagine a spiritual student so profoundly insightful that they actually end up broadening the understanding of their own teachers.
And what's fascinating here is that this isn't just some hypothetical idea, right?
Yeah.
Today, we're diving deep into the life of Sri Ramakrishna.
Exactly. A name that really resonates with deep spiritual realization.
And we're exploring his relationships with his various gurus. It's quite a story.
It is. Our main source for this deep dive is the comprehensive biography, Life of Sri Ramakrishna. We're zoning in on chapter 20, which really gets into his connections with these spiritual mentors.
So for you, the learner, think of this as a direct window into a truly unique dynamic in spiritual learning.
Yeah, we're going to uncover some pretty surprising insights, I think, into how wisdom flows, often in the most unexpected ways.
So the goal here, for you, the learner, is really to gain a richer appreciation for the process of spiritual growth and the intricate nature of that guru-disciple relationship.
Seeing how even someone as spiritually advanced as Sri Ramakrishna interacted with, and crucially even influenced his own teachers.
Now, Sri Ramakrishna's own spiritual journey, it was far from typical.
Definitely not typical. One scholar we looked at even noted that while he did accept guidance from several gurus, across different yogic paths, it was almost seen as a kind of concession to the general rule.
Right. The feeling was that his own incredibly pure mind was really his primary guide.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
It wasn't just about him soaking up knowledge.
No, what really stands out in the biography is this assertion that while Sri Ramakrishna certainly received guidance and followed it faithfully,
yes,
he also significantly influenced his teachers. The book says he illuminated dark and obscure corners of their hearts,
Wow. Expanding their spiritual perspectives, deepening their vision.
Exactly.
That's incredible. The book even mentions that his gurus eventually bowed before him, acknowledging the truth of his wisdom.
It really flips the traditional understanding on its head, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It just highlights that spiritual understanding isn't always this top-down hierarchical flow.
Sometimes, yeah, the profound realization of a disciple can, in turn, seriously enrich the understanding of the guru.
And one of the absolutely pivotal figures in this whole exchange was Totapuri.
Ah, Totapuri, yes.
This individual sounds like just an incredible presence. We learn he was likely from the Punjab region, renounced the world really young, and was initiated by a Naga sect yogi in Ludhiana.
And that's a group known for their intense ascetic practices.
Right. The biography paints such a vivid picture of him. After his own guru passed away, he actually became the head of the monastery.
And he's described as, tall, robust, living this life really close to nature.
And even as someone who had already attained high spiritual realization, he still dedicated a huge chunk of his time just to meditation.
He really embodied that ascetic ideal too. His possessions were minimal, just a water pot, tongs, a deerskin for his seat.
And a sheet to cover himself. That was basically it.
And he had this daily ritual involving fire, didn't he? He saw it as particularly sacred.
Yeah, meditating by its light late into the night.
What's fascinating there is the sort of paradox, right? Someone who supposedly arrived still sticking to such rigorous practices.
Which leads us straight into that crucial conversation they had, him and Sri Ramakrishna, about why keep meditating so intensely.
Okay, so Sri Ramakrishna basically puts it to him. Look, you've attained the highest knowledge, the ultimate truth. So why continue with such intense meditation?
Good question.
And Totapuri's response, it uses this really compelling analogy.
A water pot.
Exactly. A water pot needs daily rubbing, daily polishing to keep its shine. And that represents the mind needing constant meditation to stay pure.
So the key insight there is Totapuri really emphasizing continuous effort, right? Even after realization, to maintain that mental purity.
But then, Sri Ramakrishna, with that characteristic flash of insight.
He counters, doesn't he?
He does, he asks, but what if the pot? What if it's made of gold?
Ah. Implying that maybe a mind already steeped in pure realization doesn't need that same constant polishing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book notes that Totapuri, with a smile, he actually conceded the point. He said, yes, that is true.
It's such a brief exchange, but wow, it reveals so much about Sri Ramakrishna's intuitive grasp.
And what's also noteworthy is that Sri Ramakrishna, He remembered this very point about the value of regular meditation and later shared it with his own disciples.
You wonder if Totapuri ever thought back on his disciples' really insightful question there.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Now, Totapuri also had this very structured approach to training monks.
Oh yeah, he led a monastery with, 700 of them?
700. And the training regimen sounds incredibly disciplined.
The biography details this, gradual progression in their meditation practices.
Right. Beginners started off with thick cushions, and as they advanced, the seating became more and more austere.
Until eventually it was just like a deer skin or even the bare ground.
The whole aim was cultivating detachment from physical comfort, wasn't it?
And it wasn't just about posture either. The same gradual approach applied to diet and clothing. They were apparently trained to eventually live without clothes at all.
It was all about shedding attachments, including what the text calls the eightfold tie.
Right, the eightfold tie of shame, hatred, fear, caste, pedigree, honor, and the rest. Shedding all of that.
Which is, a fundamental principle in so many ascetic traditions. This gradual letting go of societal conditioning and ego-based stuff.
The training also involved wandering, right? Going to holy places, first with others, then alone.
Yeah, fostering independence and inner strength.
And when it came to picking the head of the monastery, the Mahant, the criterion was fascinating.
They looked for someone they considered a real Paramahamsa. Essentially, a soul who's realized the highest truth. Totally free from ego, someone truly above the temptation of money.
So they could ensure the monastery funds were actually used for, God and the monks, not personal gain.
Exactly. That emphasis on detachment from wealth for leadership is a really powerful concept. Speaks volumes about the integrity they valued.
Now, while Totapuri was clearly this highly realized individual, the biography doesn't shy away from highlighting some of his limitations.
No, it doesn't, particularly when it came to understanding sort of the complexities of human nature and maybe the role of a higher power.
The text acknowledges his good samskaras, his positive ingrained tendencies.
His sincerity, his deep faith in his own guru.
Which all helped him attain Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that state of non-dual consciousness.
Right. Beyond subject and object. And he achieved this largely through his own intense effort and self-reliance.
However, the book suggests he kind of struggled to comprehend the helplessness people feel when they're battling negative tendencies.
Yeah, and it seems he lacked a strong belief in a higher power influencing destiny beyond just sheer personal effort.
It's like he believed purely in the power of will, individual striving, almost overlooking the whole idea of grace or, external influences.
And the biography specifically mentions his supreme ignorance of the terrible power of Maya, the illusory nature of the world.
Which brings us to a really significant point of difference between Totapuri and Sri Ramakrishna.
Their perspectives on Advaita Vedanta, that philosophy emphasizing oneness.
Versus devotion or bhakti as a spiritual path.
Exactly. Totapuri, having been a lifelong follower of monism, this non-dual path, he just didn't really appreciate devotion as a valid way to realization.
Right. He viewed things like prayer, singing devotional songs, repeating God's name. He saw it all as largely meaningless, didn't he?
Pretty much. Even ridiculed the emotional expressions of devotees sometimes.
Yet, the biography points out this intriguing contradiction.
Here it is.
Sri Ramakrishna's devotional songs would sometimes bring Totapuri himself to tears, despite all his intellectual objections.
Interesting. It seems he could only grasp this Santa form of devotion, the placid, calm type.
Right. He missed the richness of approaching God in all these different ways as a master, a friend, a child, a beloved.
And those intense emotional displays you see in bhakti, the yearning, the feeling of separation, the weeping, laughing, dancing.
Totapuri saw all that as nothing short of madness.
So this fundamental difference, you could just imagine, it led to some pretty lively discussions between them.
Oh, absolutely. And their contrasting practices really illustrate this difference perfectly.
Sri Ramakrishna, for instance, even after reaching his highest spiritual states, he continued his daily practice of chanting God's names, clapping, dancing.
The biography gives examples like Hari Bol, and Oh Govinda, my life, just pouring his heart out.
And when Totapuri witnessed this, he was just astonished. He thought this was kid stuff, something for spiritual beginners.
And he even made that kind of snide remark about Sri Ramakrishna preparing bread with all the clapping.
Yes. And Sri Ramakrishna's response is just classic Ramakrishna, isn't it?
What did he say?
Nonsense. I am taking the name of God, and you compare it to the making of bread. Shame.
Sharp, but also kind of humorous, defending his devotional practice.
Exactly. And this whole difference in perspective, it really comes to a head in that story about Maya and Brahman. involving the servant and the piece of coal.
Ah, yes. Tell us about that one. It's very revealing.
It really is. So, picture this. Sri Ramakrishna and Totapuri are deep in Vedantic discussion, talking about the oneness of Brahman, how everything is ultimately divine.
Right. High philosophy.
And then a servant comes over to dig a live coal from their sacred Duni fire.
Oh, okay.
And Totapuri, completely forgetting their lofty discussion about unity, just erupts in anger, threatens to strike the servant.
Wow. Just like that.
Just like that, it crucially highlights that just intellectually understanding oneness isn't enough to overcome the illusions and reactions of the world.
And Sri Ramakrishna's reaction.
He just bursts into laughter. The book says he was rocking with laughter.
And exclaimed, "What a shame."
Totapuri is understandably confused, asks what's so funny.
And Sri Ramakrishna's reply is so perfectly insightful.
He said something like, yes, but I was also observing the depth of your realization. You were just telling me Brahman alone is real.
But the next moment you forget everything and are about to strike a man.
I laughed to see the irresistible power of Maya. Oof.
That must have hit home.
It really resonated with Totapuri. The biography says he became serious, contemplated for a moment, and then acknowledged Sri Ramakrishna's point. He recognized the sheer potency of anger and resolved right then to never succumb to it again.
So this incident became a teaching moment, didn't it? Sri Ramakrishna used it to impart a vital lesson to Totapuri about Maya.
Exactly. The illusory power of the Divine Mother. He used analogies like the thorn.
Explain that one.
Intellectually, you might know a thorn isn't ultimately real in the grand scheme, but when it pricks you.
You still react instinctively with pain.
Right. Your high philosophy is momentarily forgotten in the face of that physical sensation.
And he also used that parable of Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana.
Yes, which beautifully illustrates the point. Lakshmana, deeply devoted to Rama, can't actually see him clearly.
Why not?
Because Sita, who represents Maya, or the Divine Mother's veiling power, is standing between them.
Ah.
Only when Sita steps aside, only through the grace of the Divine Mother, can Lakshmana actually behold his Lord clearly.
So the point Sri Ramakrishna was making was that intellectual discrimination, just thinking your way through it, isn't enough to transcend Maya.
Precisely. The grace of the Divine Mother is indispensable. And this is a concept Totapuri, with his emphasis on self-effort, initially really struggled to grasp.
Now here's where the narrative takes another really unexpected, quite dramatic turn.
Yes, this incredibly robust, disciplined Totapuri, who seemed almost impervious to physical ailments.
Right, like an iron constitution, the book says.
He falls severely ill with dysentery while he's there in Bengal.
The unfamiliar climate, perhaps?
That's what the book suggests. And the persistent pain, it really started disrupting his concentration, pulling his mind away from Brahman towards his physical suffering.
He'd even thought about leaving earlier because of the climate, but stayed because he enjoyed Sri Ramakrishna's company so much.
Right. And despite getting worse, he hesitated to actually ask Sri Ramakrishna for permission to leave.
Sri Ramakrishna and Mathur Babu, they tried different things, right? Diets, medicines.
They did, but nothing seemed to provide any real relief. Though, interestingly, even in this weakened state, Totapuri could still enter samadhi at will.
But then came that one night where the pain just became unbearable.
Unbearable. He tried, really tried, to detach his mind from his body, to focus solely on Brahman.
But the pain kept pulling him back.
Exactly. The relentless pain just kept dragging his consciousness back to the body. He was frustrated, in despair.
And he made a drastic decision.
He resolved to end his suffering by drowning himself in the Ganges, to merge his body back into the elements.
And in this truly unforeseen, almost miraculous moment,
the water wasn't deep enough. He waded out, intending to find deep water, but he could practically walk across to the opposite bank.
Incredible.
He was then, standing there in the shallow water, completely bewildered, that he experienced this profound spiritual awakening.
What happened?
The biography describes it so beautifully. Suddenly, a veil was lifted. It was like a glorious vista of divine presence just unfolded before him.
Wow.
On all sides, everywhere he looked, he found the manifestation of the Divine Mother. He perceived her in everything.
In the water, the land.
In the water, the land, his own body, his mind, the pain, the comfort, knowledge, ignorance, life, death. All of it was her.
That must have been a complete shattering of his previous purely Advaitic understanding.
Absolutely. He realized the pervasive, inescapable power of the Divine Mother, that nothing, absolutely nothing could exist outside her domain without her will, not even an act of dying.
And then came the ultimate realization
That this divine mother, this Sakti, this power, was the very same Brahman he had worshipped his entire life.
Brahman and Sakti are inherently one, not two.
Exactly. In that single transformative moment, Totapuri, the staunch Advaitin, the non-dualist,
He was filled with devotion.
filled with devotion, he surrendered completely to the Divine Mother, uttering her holy name. He went back to Dakshineswar, the biography says, with a joyful heart.
The physical pain just overshadowed by this immense bliss of revelation.
Completely. And the following morning, he shared this with Sri Ramakrishna.
What did he say?
He told him that the illness, the dysentery, had actually been a friend,
A friend? How so?
because it had guided him to this profound vision, this deeper understanding. He finally understood why he'd been prevented from leaving earlier. It was all for this crucial lesson.
And he asked for permission to leave them.
Yes, but significantly, he asked for Sri Ramakrishna's mother's permission to depart. He understood now.
And Sri Ramakrishna, the book says he had this knowing smile.
Right, and reminded him gently of his prior disbelief in the Divine Mother.
And use that analogy again.
Yes, reiterating the inseparable nature of Brahman and Sakti, like fire and its inherent power to burn. You can't have one without the other.
So a few days later, after feeling he'd received the mother's okay in the temple, Totapuri finally left Dakshineswar.
He did, having gained this profound, integrated understanding.
So the key insight Totapuri ultimately gained, as Sri Ramakrishna often articulated it, is that whether you conceive of the Supreme Being as the inactive, impersonal Brahman or the dynamic, personal Sakti.
It's essentially the same reality. Like milk and its whiteness, he'd say, or a gem and its luster, or a snake and its wriggling motion.
Intrinsically connected, inseparable.
It's a profound synthesis. Although it wasn't universally embraced right away at Dakshineswar.
Ah, right. The Bhairavi Brahmani, Sri Ramakrishna's tantric teacher.
Yes, who favored dualistic worship, seeing God as distinct.
She wasn't too keen on his close association with Totapuri and his Advaita leanings, was she?
No, she worried that all this dry intellectualism, as she saw it, would make him lose his devotional fervor, his bhakti.
But Sri Ramakrishna, as the biography puts it, he just paid no heed to these words and pursued his own course.
And interestingly, following Totapuri's departure, Sri Ramakrishna himself entered this incredibly intense 6-month period.
What happened?
He became completely absorbed in the absolute identity with Brahman, a state totally transcending all duality, even basic bodily awareness.
Wow. The biography describes this period as one where he was utterly unaware of his body, its needs.
Lost all sense of I and mine. Even the distinction between subject and object just dissolved. It was a state of supreme ecstasy, this infinite stillness.
So far beyond physical consciousness that, the descriptions are vivid. Flies would enter his mouth and nostrils unnoticed.
His hair became matted because he wasn't taking care of himself, yet he felt absolutely nothing.
His body literally would have perished, wouldn't it, if not for someone else stepping in?
Exactly, if not for a compassionate visiting monk who recognized the extraordinary nature of his state and also the immense potential good Sri Ramakrishna represented for the world if his body could be preserved.
And this monk painstakingly sustained him, right? Kept his physical form going.
Yes, even resorting to kind of forceful feeding at times and gently trying methods to bring his mind back down just a little to relative consciousness.
Until eventually, Sri Ramakrishna received that command from the Divine Mother.
The command to remain on the threshold of relative consciousness for the sake of humanity.
And then, interestingly, a severe bout of dysentery helped further ground him back in the physical realm.
Right, that period of profound spiritual absorption was then followed by another interesting incident, this time involving Mathur Babu's wife, Jagadamba Dasi.
She was gravely ill, wasn't she? Seemingly beyond hope.
Yes, Mathur was distraught, but Sri Ramakrishna offered some comforting words.
And then she suddenly recovered.
Completely recovered. And then, intriguingly, Sri Ramakrishna himself came down with severe dysentery, suffering for 6 months.
It's almost suggestive of like a transfer of the illness, isn't it? Taking on her suffering.
The biography certainly hints at that possibility, and it highlights Mathur's unwavering faith and the many miracles he witnessed through Sri Ramakrishna during this time.
Even while Sri Ramakrishna was physically ill, he remained in this state of profound peace and bliss, right?
Absolutely. Still capable of entering samadhi, still engaging in deep philosophical discussions with visiting Vedantist monks, all despite his physical ailment.
Amazing. And following his recovery from that illness, his spiritual vision seems to have expanded even further.
Yes, he really came to embrace all religions as valid paths leading to the same ultimate truth.
Which is powerfully illustrated by his subsequent practice of Islam.
Right. He became deeply drawn to Islam through a particular Muslim devotee he met, a man named Govinda Rai.
And driven by that characteristic intensity of his, that desire for direct first-hand experience.
He got initiated into Islam by Govinda, and for 3 days he completely immersed himself in Islamic practices.
What did that involve?
Repeating the name of Allah, dressing in Muslim attire, reciting the namaz prayers.
And consciously setting aside all Hindu thoughts and practices during that time, a complete immersion.
A complete immersion. And the result, another profound spiritual realization.
What did he experience this time?
First, he had a vision of a radiant personage with a long beard. Then, he experienced the Brahman with attributes, the Saguna Brahman. And finally, absorption into the attributeless Brahman, the Nirguna Brahman.
So this direct experience just solidified his understanding of that fundamental unity underlying all the diverse faiths.
Exactly. The biography even mentions he was willing to eat Muslim food during this period.
Oh, really?
Yeah, only abstaining because Mothir requested him not to, worried about social repercussions. But Mothir then arranged for Muslim-style food to be prepared for him by a Brahmin cook, outside the main temple grounds.
So Sri Ramakrishna's practice of Islam, especially after his highest Advaita realization, it carries really significant implications, doesn't it?
Huge implications. The biography suggests it offers a potential foundation for Hindu-Muslim unity by revealing that shared underlying reality beneath the surface differences of religious traditions and rituals.
Now, still in a somewhat weakened state from that long bout of dysentery, the decision was made to send Sri Ramakrishna back to his native village.
Yes, back to Kamarpukur to recuperate fully.
It had been quite a while, hadn't it? 8 years since his last visit?
8 years. And apparently the villagers had heard all sorts of rumors about his unconventional behavior at Dakshine's war.
So they were probably a bit apprehensive.
Perhaps initially, but upon his return, they saw him. And they recognized the familiar Gadadhar, their childhood friend.
Albeit one now imbued with this palpable, undeniable spiritual presence.
Exactly. And his company just brought them immense peace and joy. His home was constantly filled with visitors, just wanting to be near his saintly presence.
He ended up staying for 6 or 7 months there, didn't he?
Yes. And during that time, he gently guided the villagers towards spiritual understanding, but always within the context of their everyday lives and duties.
There's even that remarkable little anecdote about a simple village woman instantly recognizing when he went into samadhi.
Yes. Shows how perceptible his state was, even to those not formally trained in spiritual matters.
And during the stay in Kamarpukur, his wife, Sarada Devi, joined him.
Right. She, who later became revered as the Holy Mother, she was staying with her father nearby in Jairambati.
They hadn't really known each other as adults, had they? She was only 7 when they last met properly.
Correct. She arrived in Kamarpukur as a young woman, around 14, and this was their first real meeting as husband and wife in an adult context.
And she quickly understood his unique mental and spiritual state.
Very quickly.
Yeah.
And she dedicated herself wholeheartedly just to serving him with incredible devotion and understanding.
And Sri Ramakrishna, for his part, he fully embraced his responsibility to guide her, didn't he?
He did. He saw it as an opportunity, recalling his guru Totapuri's words about remaining established in Brahman even while living with a wife. It was a chance to test and validate his own realizations.
So he took her training seriously, in worldly matters as well as spiritual.
Absolutely. He ensured she received a comprehensive education for managing a household and fulfilling her duties, alongside deep spiritual instruction.
And the Holy Mother, in turn, just deeply admired his selfless love and committed herself completely to following his path.
Now, the Bhairavi Brahmani, who had accompanied Sri Ramakrishna to Kamarpukur, she maintained a close relationship with his family there.
But she wasn't without her own issues, right? Despite her spiritual advancement.
No, the biography points out she hadn't quite reached perfection. She was still prone to pride, jealousy, anger.
And she apparently disapproved of Sri Ramakrishna's close relationship with his wife, Sarada Devi.
Yes, possibly fearing it would compromise his vow of celibacy, or perhaps just out of a kind of spiritual possessiveness. She even boasted sometimes about having opened his eyes spiritually.
A bit of ego there.
A bit, yes. And despite all this, Sri Ramakrishna continued to show her great reverence.
And the Holy Mother served her lovingly too.
With immense love and submission, despite the Brahmani's sometimes peevish behavior. Eventually, though, after a quarrel with Friday, Sri Ramakrishna's nephew,
Yes.
the Brahmani seemed to have a realization. She recognized her own shortcomings, her pride, and understood the need to detach herself physically from the master.
So she decided to leave.
Yes. She bid this very remorseful farewell, adorning Sri Ramakrishna as Sri Gauranga, the embodiment of divine love, and sought his forgiveness.
How long had she been with him altogether?
About 6 years, and undoubtedly experienced significant spiritual growth herself through that association, despite her imperfections.
Before finally returning to Dakshineswar, Sri Ramakrishna also visited Friday's village, Sihor, a few times.
Right, where he engaged in religious discussions with local Vaishnava devotees Friday invited.
And there's that touching story about Friday's mother, Hemanjini Devi.
Ah, yes, her deep devotion to Sri Ramakrishna and her prayer to pass away in the holy city of Benares.
A wish Sri Ramakrishna granted, assuring her it would happen, and indeed, it later came to fruition.
A testament to her faith and his spiritual power.
Finally, his health fully restored in the village air, Sri Ramakrishna began the return journey to Dakshineswar with Friday.
And there's one last incident recounted from that journey, near Burdwan.
Involving some plants.
Yes, some specific plants considered pleasing to Lord Shiva. Sri Ramakrishna saw them, picked some, and entered this deep trance-like state while worshipping with them.
Completely transcending conventional notions of cleanliness or uncleanliness in that absorbed state.
So much so that Friday actually had to physically carry him to the station to catch their train.
Wow. So as he profoundly impacted them, most notably Totapuri, whose whole realization about the Divine Mother was utterly transformative, initiated by Ramakrishna's presence and insight.
And we witnessed this beautiful synthesis, this coming together of Advaita Vedanta, the path of non-dual knowledge, and Bhakti, the path of devotion, the impersonal and the personal aspects of the divine shown to be one.
And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, for you, the learner, maybe consider how often the dynamic of learning and teaching is actually more fluid, more two-way than we typically assume.
Right. Even those we see as experts, as masters, can have their perspective significantly broadened by those they guide or interact with.
It also really underscores that ultimate truth isn't confined to just one single path, and that encountering diverse viewpoints, different approaches, can be incredibly enriching for our own understanding.
Definitely.
So perhaps for our final thought today, you could contemplate this. What's the real interplay between your own determined efforts, your study, your practice, your striving and learning and understanding, and the potential for those unexpected moments of insight, grace, or revelation that might just arise from encountering a completely different perspective or maybe an unforeseen experience?
Yeah, what deeply held beliefs or assumptions might you possess, consciously or unconsciously, that could perhaps be challenged or expanded or even transformed by genuinely venturing beyond your current understanding? Something to mull over.
I hope you like this chapter. We need volunteers and sponsors to create content with even better quality and with more variety. If you wish to join this initiative as a volunteer or sponsor, please click the links given in description below. To help us reach more viewers, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Biography Central. Thank you for your time. It means a lot. Namaste.